Hello, welcome back to Local Love. This week we're doing something a little different, maybe a little creepy, something very seasonal. I'm going to tell you some of my true life ghost stories. Stay tuned.
Hello, Amanda. It's time to play a game.
Thank you. Welcome back to Local Love. This is Amanda, head of promotions, and today we're going to get into a dark place. So I'm going to start with one of my older ghost stories today. We're going to call this The Missing Boys. Okay, so like most people, when we're in high school, some of our friends are a little odd. Some of them may not be what you'd expect. I definitely hang out with the oddball kids for sure. One of my dear friends, whose name I'll kind of keep out of this, but we'll call her Karen. She was a very sheltered girl. We became really good friends. I was a couple years older than her in high school, and basically, once we started hanging out, we, at some point, discussed the fact of a Ouija board. Well, Karen had never used a Ouija board before. So she was curious, and all I knew about them is that my parents used to do it. Well, my mother and her friends anyway, back in the 70s, the 80s, somewhere in there. And that's all I knew about it, is that it was what I thought was a game. Kind of how they market it. Well, at some point, she got really interested in the idea of it. So I was like, well, let's go get one. We got one. And before you knew it, we were, playing with the Ouija. She'd come to my house and play the Ouija board with me, or we might go to the local park. At any rate, we hung out and we did that quite often, actually. We were very fond of it. So once we did that, we'd sometimes just, chill and do whatever. We never had any real weird experience from that at that point. But I will say this about my friend Karen. She is we'll call her a little bit flaky, because of being so sheltered. She wasn't, probably not what you would expect. And one day, I picked her up and brought her to the house. And we were going to do the Ouija board. And she goes, Amanda, did you hear about the missing boys from the other high school here in Tallahassee? And this is where I was at the time. We were at Lincoln High School. And the boys that were missing were from Leon High School in Tallahassee, Florida. And she was like, no, 3 boys went missing. They said last time they saw them was they were in their red Camaro, and they expect that it might have been a drug deal gone bad or something, but for whatever reason, they can't find them. They haven't seen them in the last 2 weeks. Well, this frightened me a bit. I was like, that's terrible. And then my friend did something unusual. She pulls out from her pocket a newspaper article. And of course, the article is about these boys. Handsome high school kids, your typical thing. One of them specifically was a very blonde, very handsome young man. And I'll go ahead and change his name as well, just to keep this on the low. But we'll call him Bob. Bob Jacoby. Now, Bob, we didn't know them. We didn't have any ties to them whatsoever. But for some reason, my friend Karen was completely fixated on Bob. So I was like, okay, what's going on? She's like, well, here's the article. And she's like, I was just curious. Do you think that we could ask the board if it knows anything about these missing boys? I was like, well, yeah, absolutely. I don't see why we can't ask. I wouldn't get your hopes up, So we started asking questions. And one of the questions, of course, was, are they alive or dead? the board slowly spelled out D-E-A-D. They're dead. We're like, oh, no. And then we're like, where are they? And the board spelled out L-A-K-E. Lake. And we just looked at each other because we couldn't figure out what we were supposed to think of that. And then we're like, where in the lake? And it spelled out T-R-U-N-K. Trunk. And then we asked a couple other questions, nothing really that made any sense, and we didn't really get any big reaction. Those were the most, integral part of our conversation. And my friend, for whatever reason, she got super focused on this kid, this missing boy, and his friends. And it just seemed like she got really fixated on the idea of not only doing the Ouija board, but also on trying to find out where these kids were. So it was a theme for a minute. So I hadn't thought much about it. I'm sitting, 2 weeks later, I think it was. I was sitting downstairs watching the news with my mom. And there's this truck pulling a red Camaro out of one of our local lakes. And honestly, I don't remember which one it was there in Tallahassee, but they were pulling this out of the lake. And the report said that all 3 boys had been stuffed in the trunk. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. They were stuffed in their trunk. It's crazy. But it's not like we could have gone, hey, officer, the Ouija board told us lake trunk, dead. And what are you going to do? I told my mom, and she freaked out, and I looked at my friend and I was like, that's it for me. I don't think I'm going to use a Ouija board again. And she got fixated, actually, pretty hardcore. She got really, really fixated to the point where she couldn't seem to focus on school or anything. She would make little Ouija boards while she was at school, and it was kind of nutsy. And then, and I kept telling her, you got to knock it off. You're acting crazy. And then she looked at me one day, and while we're sitting, and I think we were at lunch, she had her notebook there, like a folder, like the old school plain folders. And she's talking to me. And she's like, I don't know what to do. I can't seem to stop. I was like, well, I'll do my best to help, We just won't do it, and we'll get rid of it, and, we'll try to focus on other things. While she's telling me that she can't bring herself to stop, and I'm saying what I'm saying, I noticed her hand was moving, but I didn't think anything of it. I thought, well, she's probably nervous. She's doodling. Next thing I know, she gasps. She's like, ugh. I was like, what's going on? She's like, look. And she showed me her notebook, or her folder that she had there. She had drawn a picture of what I can only describe as like a man, a small-statured man with a goat's head. And to be quite honest, he was flipping us the old middle finger. And she looked at me and she's like, I didn't do that. And I reminded her, because one thing that when we really got hyped up on the idea of what a Ouija board was, we did kind of a lot of history and a lot of studying on it. So much so that we actually carried it into school, and they wouldn't let us take it out of the box, but we were able to do a report in one class for me, and then I got to go to her class and we did a report there. So we were teaching people about it. But one thing I reminded her was that using the Ouija board sometimes can cause automatic writing. And I think that may be what my friend experienced. So I'm not a big fan of a Ouija board. That doesn't mean y'all have to stop using it, but please, for the love, at least learn how to use it the proper way. And be respectful. I know it looks like a toy, but, just going to say, dead lake trunk. I'm not so sure anymore. Think about that.
Locallovenow.